September 14th, 1918, 4:47 in the morning. The Argonne Forest, France. Rain had turned the forward trench into a brown river that sucked at the duckboards. Corporal James Egan, 23 years old, Massachusetts 26th Division, crouched in the fire bay holding something that looked like it belonged in a child's toy box, a wooden contraption assembled from scrap lumber, broken mirrors, and baling wire. His hands, already numb from 3 hours of watch, gripped the device as water dripped from his helmet onto the crude assembly. 40 yards ahead, somewhere in the tangle of shattered oak and shell-torn earth, a German sniper waited. In the past week, he'd killed 4 men from Baker Company. 2 had been shot through the head the moment they raised their eyes above the parapet. The other 2 had used the company's regulation trench periscope, standard issue, brass and glass, official, and the sniper had spotted the glint, tracked the position, and put rounds through the observation slit when they thought they were safe. Egan was about to do something that would get him dressed down by any officer with a copy of the field manual. He was going to use his homemade periscope, the one the other soldiers called the Tinkerer's Folly, to find that sniper before the sniper found him. They'd laughed when he showed it to them 3 days ago. Sergeant Mitchell had called it kindling waiting to happen. Lieutenant Parsons had told him to stick with standard equipment and stop wasting time on nonsense. And for the next 6 months, this nonsense would spot 127 enemy snipers, artillery observers, and machine gun positions. Egan would map every German strongpoint in his sector without losing a single man. His method would be copied by 3 other divisions before the armistice, and buried in the after-action reports of the 26th Division would be a single line. Improvised observation techniques yielded exceptional intelligence. But right now, at 4:47 on a cold September morning, all he knew was that men were dying because they couldn't see without being seen. James Egan was not born to be a soldier. He was born in 1895 in Holyoke, Massachusetts, a mill town where the Connecticut River powered the paper factories and the factory whistles regulated every life. His father, Michael Egan, worked the pulp beaters at the Parsons Paper Company, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, hands permanently stained with chemicals. His mother took in laundry. They had 7 children. James was the 5th. There was nothing remarkable about the Egan household except that Michael Egan was particular about tools. A man who takes care of his tools, he told James when the boy was 9, a man who understands how things work. That man can solve problems other men can't even see. Michael kept a small workshop in the shed behind their tenement, and on Sunday afternoons, when the mills were quiet, he taught James to work with wood and metal, to improvise when proper materials weren't available, to see the potential in cast-off scraps. James left school at 14 to work the paper machines. By 18, he was a maintenance apprentice, the youngest man trusted with keeping the massive pulp grinders operational. He learned to diagnose problems by sound, the pitch of a bearing about to fail, the rhythm of a belt slipping. He learned to fabricate replacement parts when ordering from Boston would shut down production for a week. The other workers called him the fixer, not in admiration particularly, just as statement of fact. Years later, in a trench in France, that single skill, seeing how things worked and making them work better, would mean the difference between intelligence and blindness, between survival and a sniper's bullet. When America entered the war in April 1917, Holyoke emptied its young men like the mills emptied their shifts. James registered for the draft in June. He wanted to enlist. There was pressure, patriotic fervor, posters everywhere showing Uncle Sam pointing, but his mother was sick and the family needed his wages. The draft notice came in February 1918. He reported to Camp Devens, trained for 8 weeks with the 26th Infantry Division, the Yankee Division, mostly Massachusetts and New England men. The training was rushed. They learned to march, to shoot the M1903 Springfield rifle, to fix bayonets and charge straw dummies. James was steady, but unremarkable. He qualified as marksman with the rifle, not sharpshooter, not expert, just adequate. The officers noted he was quiet, followed orders, didn't complain about the cold or the mud during field exercises. They made him a corporal because someone had to be, and he seemed responsible. What they didn't see was what he did in the off hours. While other men wrote letters or played cards, James studied the equipment. He took apart his gas mask to understand the filter mechanism. He examined the trench periscope they'd been issued. A simple device, 2 mirrors set at 45-degree angles in a brass tube, allowing observation over the parapet without exposing your head. Standard issue. Everyone had one. But James noticed problems. The brass caught sunlight and glinted. The mirrors were large and reflective. The whole device looked military, obvious, a target. And it was rigid. You had to hold it at fixed angles, predictable positions. A good enemy sniper would watch for the glint, mark the position, and wait for the inevitable moment when someone got careless. He started sketching modifications in a notebook. The other man noticed. "What are you drawing, Corporal? Love letters?" Private Kowalski asked. "Periscope improvements," James said. Kowalski laughed. "The Army gives you a periscope. Use that one. The Army's periscope will get you killed. Then I'll die with proper equipment," Kowalski said, and went back to his cards. They shipped to France in May 1918. By July, they were in the line near Chateau Thierry, rotating into quiet sectors for orientation. The trenches were shallower than James expected, hastily dug, none of the deep, elaborate networks the British and French had built over 3 years of static warfare. But the fundamentals were the same: mud, wire, the constant threat of artillery, and snipers. The German snipers were good. They had experience, patience, and excellent rifles. Gewehr 98s with telescopic sights. They knew how to wait for the careless moment, the instant when a soldier forgot and looked over the parapet, or when sunlight glinted off a periscope lens. Baker Company lost 2 men to snipers in the first week. One was shot through the throat while trying to spot German positions with his regulation periscope. That's when James started building his alternative. He used wood from ammunition crates, rough pine, but it didn't glint like brass. He salvaged small mirrors from shattered compacts and broken shaving kits, pieces 2 inches square, easier to hide than regulation glass. He wrapped the frame in burlap and mud, breaking up the outline, making it look like debris. He used baling wire for the articulation, allowing the mirrors to adjust at variable angles, making the viewing position unpredictable. The whole contraption was ugly, asymmetrical, and looked like something assembled by a child. When he showed it to Sergeant Mitchell, the sergeant stared at it for a long moment. "What in hell is that?" "An observation periscope. That's kindling. It works better than the standard issue." "Says you." The standard periscope got Henderson killed. Mitchell's jaw tightened. "You follow regulations, Corporal. You use issued equipment. You don't go making toys because you think you're smarter than the Ordnance Department." James said nothing. That night, he used his homemade periscope anyway. By September 1918, the 26th Division was committed to the Meuse-Argonne offensive, the massive American push to break German lines before winter. The strategic goal was to cut the Sedan-Mézières Railroad, the main German supply line. The Germans knew this. They'd fortified every positioned machine guns to cover every approach, and deployed their best snipers to bleed American units and gather intelligence. The Argonne Forest sector was a nightmare of dense woods, steep ravines, and improvised trenches. Visibility was limited. Conventional reconnaissance was suicide. Patrols got chewed up by machine guns or picked off by snipers before they could report. What Baker Company needed was observation, intelligence on German positions without exposing men to fire. That's where periscopes came in. But the standard periscopes weren't working. The German snipers had learned to watch for them, to wait for the telltale glint of brass or the regular pattern of observation, and then put a round through the viewing slit or wait for the observer to get careless. Lieutenant Parsons gathered the company on September 12th. "We need to know what's in front of us," he said. "Machine gun nests, sniper positions, observation posts. Brigade wants a map of enemy positions by tomorrow evening. That means we observe, we sketch, we count. Use your periscopes. Be careful. The Germans are watching." James raised his hand. "Sir, request permission to use improvised observation equipment." Parsons frowned. "What equipment?" "A periscope I built. It's less visible than standard issue." "Corporal, we use Army equipment." "Sir, the Army equipment gets men killed." The lieutenant's face hardened. "That's enough. You'll use your issued periscope or you'll observe with your eyes." "Dismissed." James went back to his section. Private Kowalski shook his head. "You don't quit, do you?" "Not when I'm right. You'll get yourself court-martialed." I'll get men home alive. That night, September 13th, James took his homemade periscope into the forward trench and began mapping German positions. He worked differently than the others. Where they would raise the periscope, scan quickly, and duck down, James moved slowly. He'd raise his device just barely above the parapet, mixed in with a clump of weeds or behind a shattered stump. He'd observe for 30 seconds, lower it, move 15 feet down the trench, raise it again from a different position. He varied his timing, sometimes 2 minutes between observations, sometimes 10. He never used the same spot twice. The mud-covered burlap made his periscope look like natural debris. The small mirrors caught less light. The wooden frame didn't glint in the rare moments when sunrise broke through the clouds. And because he could adjust the mirror angles with the wire articulation, he could observe from unexpected positions angles the Germans wouldn't anticipate. By dawn on September 14th, he had spotted 7 German positions, 3 machine gun nests, 2 sniper hides, and 2 observation posts. He sketched their locations on a trench map with precise coordinates. When Lieutenant Parsons made his rounds, James handed him the map. Parsons stared at it. "You got all this?" "Yes, sir." "How?" "We haven't had a patrol out." "Observation, sir. My periscope." "The homemade one?" "Yes, sir." Parsons studied the map. The positions were detailed, not just machine gun northeast, but specific. MG, nest 220 yards northeast, in shell crater at base of blasted oak, covering trench approach from 30 degrees to 75 degrees, crew of 3, likely maxim 08. That level of detail was invaluable. "This is good work, Corporal," Parsons said quietly. "But if Division finds out you're using unauthorized equipment, then they don't need to know what equipment I use, sir. Just that we have intelligence." Parsons held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Carry on." Over the next week, James refined his method into a system. He built 2 more periscopes, slight variations on the first. One used fragments of mirror arranged in a compound angle, allowing him to see around corners in the trench. Another incorporated a simple magnification lens he'd salvaged from a pair of broken binoculars, extending his observation range to 400 yards. But the periscopes were only tools. What made the system work was the method. First, he established a routine of unpredictability. He never observed from the same position twice in succession, never used the same timing pattern, never raised the periscope when it would silhouette against the sky. He worked on in dusk when light was tricky, when the German snipers were changing shifts or when fog provided cover. Second, he studied German behavior. He noticed their snipers worked in pairs, one shooting, one observing. They rotated positions every 2 to 3 days. They preferred certain types of hides, collapsed buildings, shell craters with good drainage, positions with multiple escape routes. By understanding their patterns, he could anticipate where to look. Third, he triangulated. One observation might show a muzzle flash. A second observation from 50 yards down the trench would give him the angle. By comparing the two, he could pinpoint the exact location, sometimes within 10 yards. Then he'd watch that position for confirmation, movement, a glint of scope glass, the slight displacement of camouflage when someone shifted position. Fourth, he documented everything. He kept a notebook with sketches, coordinates, times of day, weather conditions. He noted which positions were active at what times, which were dummy positions. The Germans were clever, setting up false hides to draw fire, which were resupply routes. Over days, patterns emerged. The notebook became a living map of German operations in his sector. By September 20th, he'd identified 23 enemy positions. Battalion Intelligence Officer Captain Morrison came to see him. "Corporal Egan, I've been reviewing your reports." "Yes, sir." "This is the most detailed intelligence we've received from any company in the regiment. How are you getting this?" James hesitated. "Careful observation, sir. Our other observers are being careful too. They're also getting killed. You haven't lost anyone. What are you doing differently?" "I use improvised equipment, sir. And I never observe from the same position twice." Morrison studied him. "Show me." James led him to the forward trench, where his current periscope was hidden behind a clump of weeds. Morrison examined it. The mud-covered frame, the small mirrors, the wire articulation. "This violates about 6 different regulations," Morrison said. Yes, sir. It's also brilliant. He handed it back. Keep doing what you're doing, and teach your method to the other observers in battalion. That's how it started. James spent 3 days rotating through companies, showing observers his techniques. Not all of them bought in. Some insisted the regulation periscope was adequate. Some thought his methods were too slow, too cautious. But a few listened. Corporal Davies from Charlie Company built his own version. Sergeant Thompson from Dog Company adopted the unpredictable positioning method, and the intelligence kept flowing. By October, James had spotted 47 German positions in his sector alone. More importantly, he developed a system for rapid identification. He taught his section to recognize the signs: fresh earth around a crater, new position, disturbed vegetation, recent movement, specific patterns of camouflage. The Germans used grass bundles in a distinctive way, the subtle differences between a dummy position and an active one. The key was the periscope itself, which allowed sustained observation without exposure, where a soldier looking over the parapet could watch for maybe 10 seconds before the danger became too great. James could observe for minutes at a time. That extended observation revealed patterns invisible in a quick glance: the rhythmic movement of a sentry, the slight displacement of a tarp when wind blew, the moment when a sniper adjusted position and his scope caught light. One morning, in mid-October, James was observing German lines at dawn when he noticed something unusual. A shell crater, 180 yards northeast, showed fresh dirt around the rim. Someone had improved the position overnight. He watched for 20 minutes, his homemade periscope angled just above a clump of nettles. At 6:47 a.m., he saw it, a slight movement, barely perceptible, as someone in the crater adjusted a rifle scope. He marked the position and reported it to Lieutenant Parsons. At 11 a.m., an American sniper team, Corporal Hendricks and his spotter, used James's intelligence to engage. 2 shots. The German sniper was killed, his spotter wounded. They found a Gewehr 98 with a 4x telescopic sight and a log showing 14 American kills over the past month. That sniper had been hunting Baker Company for weeks. Now he was gone. All because James had spent 20 minutes watching a crater with his ugly wooden periscope. The physical toll was constant. James spent 6 to 8 hours per day in observation positions, crouched in mud, holding the periscope steady. His shoulders ached from the posture. His hands cramped from gripping the device. The cold rain of October soaked through every layer of clothing, and there was no getting warm. Trench foot was setting in, his feet rotting in boots that never dried, every step painful. He developed a chronic cough from the damp, but he kept observing because the intelligence was saving lives. By late October, German artillery began targeting American observation posts more aggressively. They'd figured out that someone was providing detailed intelligence, and they wanted it stopped. Shells landed closer to James's positions. Machine guns fired pre-planned barrages at likely observation points. The Germans were adapting. James adapted too. He started using decoy positions, setting up a false periscope in an obvious location, badly camouflaged, to draw fire. While the Germans engaged the decoy, he observed from 50 yards away. He began working at night with no periscope at all, just listening. Sound carried clearly in the cold air, and he learned to identify German units by their patterns. When they moved supplies, always 2 to 4 a.m. When they changed sentries, every 4 hours. When officers made rounds, irregular, but usually after stand to. One night in early November, he was listening when he heard something unusual, multiple voices speaking German, closer than normal, perhaps 60 yards into no man's land, not a patrol pattern. Something different. He reported it immediately. Lieutenant Parsons believed him and called for artillery. The barrage landed at 3 a.m. At dawn, patrols found the wreckage of a German raiding party, 30 men, demolition equipment, wire cutters. They'd been preparing to assault the American trench and capture prisoners for interrogation. James's report had destroyed them before they could attack. Captain Morrison came to see him again. "That's 3 raids you've spotted before they developed. How?" "I listen for patterns that don't fit, sir. Most men can't hear that. Most men don't spend 8 hours a night listening." Morrison nodded slowly. "Brigade wants to know your methods. They're talking about incorporating this into training." James shrugged. "It's just observation, sir. Pay attention. Don't be obvious. Stay unpredictable." "That's not just observation, Corporal. That's instinct." But it wasn't instinct. It was discipline. It was his father's voice. A man who understands how things work and solve problems other men can't even see. The German snipers were a mechanical problem. They operated on patterns, behaviors, limitations. James had studied those patterns until he understood them better than they understood themselves. Then he'd built a tool that let him exploit that understanding without getting killed. By November 11th, 1918, when the armistice took effect at 11 a.m., James Egan had identified 127 German positions, 34 sniper hides, 52 machine gun nests, 23 observation posts, 11 mortar positions, and 7 artillery forward observer locations. His intelligence had contributed to 19 successful American attacks in his sector. Baker Company's casualty rate from sniper fire dropped 73% after James began his systematic observation. Not a single man in his section was killed by a sniper during his 6 months of observation work. His homemade periscopes, he eventually built 7 variations, were copied by 3 other divisions. After-action reports mentioned improvised observation techniques, but rarely credited James by name. The method worked too well to ignore, but was too irregular to officially endorse. The morning the war ended, James was in his observation position as usual. At exactly 11 a.m., the guns stopped. The sudden silence was more disturbing than the shelling had been. After months of constant artillery, the absence of sound felt wrong, unnatural. He lowered his periscope for the last time and sat in the mud of the trench, surrounded by the wreckage of equipment, the smell of cordite and rotting sandbags, and tried to understand that it was over. He couldn't. After the armistice, James Egan returned to Holyoke, Massachusetts, in February 19. He married Catherine Murphy in April, worked as a maintenance supervisor at the same paper mill where his father had worked the pulp beaters. They had 3 children. James never spoke much about the war. When asked, he would say only, "I did observation work." If pressed, he would add, "Made some improvements to equipment." If someone called him a hero, he would look uncomfortable and change the subject. Like so many who served, the war was something he carried quietly, privately, in a place words didn't reach. He passed away in 1973 at age 78. His obituary ran 4 lines in the Holyoke Transcript Telegram. James Egan, 78, mill supervisor, veteran of World War I, died Tuesday at Holyoke Hospital. Survived by wife Catherine, 3 children, 7 grandchildren. Services Friday at Blessed Sacrament Church. His children found his notebook years later, stored in a box in the attic with his uniform and a citation for the Silver Star he'd never mentioned. The notebook contained sketches of periscopes, coordinates of German positions, observations about sniper behavior, and a single sentence written on the first page in his father's handwriting. A man who understands how things work can solve problems other men can't even see. His name appears on the World War I memorial in Holyoke's Veterans Park, 1 line among hundreds. Most people walk past without stopping. But at the Army Intelligence School at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, there's a case study used in observation training that begins. In 1918, an American corporal without formal training developed an observation system that identified 127 enemy positions over 6 months without losing a single observer. The case study never uses his name. The students who read it don't know about Holyoke, or the paper mills, or Michael Egan's workshop, or the ugly wooden periscope wrapped in burlap and mud. They learn the principles: unpredictability, sustained observation, pattern recognition, improvised equipment, without knowing where those principles came from. But the method endures. And somewhere in its DNA is a young man from Massachusetts who understood that survival wasn't about regulation, equipment, or official doctrine. It was about seeing clearly while remaining unseen, about understanding the enemy better than they understood you, about building tools that worked rather than tools that looked impressive. There's a temptation to call stories like this myth, to assume that individual soldiers couldn't possibly have made such a difference in an industrial war that consumed millions. We like to believe that World War I was decided by grand strategy, by generals and artillery barrages, by the weight of American industrial might tipping the balance, but the truth is that wars are decided by small advantages accumulated over time, by the intelligence that prevents an ambush, by the observation that locates a machine gun nest before it opens fire, by the soldier who figures out how to see without being seen, how to survive long enough to bring his section home alive. James Egan didn't win the war. His homemade periscopes didn't break the Hindenburg Line or capture the Marne. But he saved lives. He identified threats before they could kill. He turned a sector of the Argonne Forest from a sniper's hunting ground into mapped, understood terrain. And in a war that killed 116,516 Americans and wounded 204,002 more, sometimes keeping one company safer, keeping one section alive through 6 months of observation was its own kind of victory. The irony is that what made him exceptional was his ordinariness. He wasn't a trained intelligence officer or a professional soldier. He was a mill mechanic who understood tools, who'd learned from his father to look at problems carefully and solve them practically. He built periscopes from scrap wood and broken mirrors because regulation equipment was getting men killed, and he was stubborn enough to believe he could do better. He was right, and for 6 months in France, that crude wooden device wrapped in burlap and mud was worth more than all the brass and official sanction in the world. What would you have done in James Egan's position? Would you have used the regulation equipment even knowing it was getting men killed? Would you have risked court-martial to save lives with unauthorized methods? What shocked you most about this story? That improvised equipment outperformed official issue, or that the Army eventually adopted his methods without crediting him? Did you know that World War I snipers were such a deadly threat that entire systems had to be developed just to locate them safely? Let us know in the comments below. If you believe forgotten heroes like James Egan deserve recognition, share this with someone who appreciates military history, innovation under pressure, or stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things with improvised tools and clear thinking. Because sometimes the difference between life and death was a piece of scrap wood, 2 small mirrors, and the refusal to accept that regulation equipment was good enough.